Welcome, friends,
to the How To Heretic.
I'm Uncle Mark.
And I'm Uncle Dan.
And I am Uncle Doug.
And this is your user's guide to life on the outside.
That's right. Leaving religion is the first step into a larger, better world.
But it can also be a scary world. Things work differently now.
Never fear. That's why we're here.
We're your audio uncles. And with help from good friends and experts in all sorts of fields.
We're going to share the stories and seek the knowledge to build a great life.
After all, you only get the one that we know of, so you better make the most of it.
Anyhow. Well, fellas.
Hi-yo.
Here we are, episode 144, which I believe is mathematically called gross. We are officially a gross podcast, and
we've always been gross, but this is now we've got a gross worth of podcasting.
And we're recording on Sunday, the night after a certain event in Tulsa, and I just want to speak on behalf of the entire podcast and say we love K-pop. Like, I just want to make it abundantly clear. BTS, you name it, we love it. Always have. The world needs more of it. So that's our official position.
Well done, K-pop kids. That was
and
pretty,
please
pretty
don't think we don't like you ever for any reason at all, because we love the shit out of you. So with that said, we're gonna talk about it's not going to be a K-pop heavy podcast this time.
Just 2 out of 3 segments are K-pop heavy.
Right.
Totally. Yeah. So, Doug, you got a fun thing a little close to home.
Yeah, I figured, we've got such a bevy and broad menu of white supremacists to choose from. Let's go local.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about old Cliven Bundy.
And then I am going to talk about a very much not local story that is a kind of both amazing and distressing. And if you ever saw Beneath the Planet of the Apes with the weird mutant missile church, this will make sense to you.
Right. Missile churches. I don't. I did not see that.
In the terrible sequel, there's like mutants live underground because there's been a nuclear war, and they worship like ICBMs. It's very bizarre.
There you go.
It sounds much better than it is.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and because it's Sunday for me, I'm going to give us a Bible story because that's how I do.
Yep, he's going to tie in Bible, candy, and baseball, and it's going to be amazing.
It's a miracle, really, that you guys inflict on me.
And uniquely for the Bible, consent.
And what's more American than that? Not consent, but candy, baseball, in the Bible.
Yeah, exactly.
And just so everybody knows, we had a lovely listener who approached us about starting a Facebook group, and we had a little conversation about it. And so our friend listener Joe has started a Facebook group that's we're not really in charge of, and we're not really officially part of.
Yeah, it's not an official group, but if you want to associate with other fans of the show, you can find it on Facebook. It's called something. What's it called?
I believe it's the How To Heretic Unofficial Heretic Hangout. Isn't that it?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, look for it. It will. Wait, I'm pulling it up. It's the How To Heretic Unofficial. Yes, or rather, the Unofficial Heretic Hangout. Fans of the How To Heretic podcast, I believe, is something like that. Go ahead and search it out. See what you can
entering
find.
Words until it comes up. Whatever comes to mind.
And another listener of ours, Vern, is diligently working his way through our back catalog and getting our segments onto YouTube. So searchable, sendable, encapsulated segments of our show.
Yeah. And if you want, you can use that to only listen to your favorite uncle, whoever that might be.
Hey, what's up out there?
And don't forget, we got merch all day. So you can go to the How To Heretic website, click on Heretic, and my God, the retail world will open up before you vis-a-vis heresy. So please enjoy that.
Glorious vagina.
Oh, yes, like that. So we need to go talk to HR, and while we're doing that, why don't you guys enjoy the show?
Hey, Uncle Mark.
Hello.
When was the last time you just took over a federal building?
Well, it depends on your definition of federal, Dan.
Oh, okay.
Are you talking about the sovereign state of Mark? Or are you talking about the illegal U.S. federal government?
Yeah, right? The
Yeah.
illegitimate
Government.
federal government trying to stomp on our rights as individuals and as people in a state.
I am currently occupying the Free State of Mark, which is
okay.
just off my bedroom.
I have invaded that state at least once.
You have, and we need to talk about that.
Yeah, well,
Well,
I wanted to graze my cattle. What am I going to do?
Doug, what sovereign citizen good times do you have for us?
well, dear uncles, we're we're living through some tough times right now. So much so that global pandemic may not even make it to the top 5 stories of the day. The main story of our day right now is systemic white supremacy that has been as American as apple pie since long before its founding, and how that white supremacy has been manifesting itself in the disparate health outcomes from the coronavirus pandemic on white communities and communities of color, and in police brutality and violence disproportionately directed at black and brown people. This centuries-long moral calamity was once again sparked into riots by the killing of George Floyd less than a month ago. The righteous outrage over that killing has led to sustained street protests and a truly amazing change in public opinion about policing and the presence in our country of monuments to our racist past that exist only to perpetuate it. So it's been wonderful to watch the toppling of statues of Confederate generals, the renaming of streets and buildings, and even, please God please, to the possible renaming of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Alabama to the John Lewis Bridge. Mm-hmm. That's got to happen.
Yeah.
And last week, Uncle Mark talked about the fact that we here in Utah have our own statues to a racist, murderous, treasonous, slavery-supporting white supremacist, good old Brigham Young.
And that's before we get to the sex crimes.
That's right.
Let's just stay with the racial animus for the moment.
Well, it seems as though someone took your segment literally, Mark, and drenched the statue of Brigham Young at BYU with red paint and the word racist.
That's a little bit stunning to me.
Yeah.
That must be under so much camera surveillance.
Yeah. I would be afraid on that campus to do, Yeah. But, hey, good on you.
But you can fool BYU cameras by going in with a beard. They don't know what to do with that. Their facial recognition software goes crazy.
Yeah, they think it's some residue from the first vision, so they just turn the cameras off.
Well, if you take your beard, does she have to wait in the car, or did she come with you to do the painting? So
beards can be he's as well, Doug.
That's true. Today I thought we could talk about what kind of people an organization founded on white supremacy might look like 133 years later. So I want to be a little careful here at the beginning and state for the record that there are, of course, very good people who call themselves Mormon. We all know some.
There's
Many
good
of these
people on all sides.
That's right. Many of these people are kind, generous, and even allies to communities of color and the LGBTQ community. Here's the thing, though. These people are good people because they're good people, not because of their religion, or at least not the religion that Brigham Young left behind in 1877 as his burst appendix slowly poisoned his body. Those good people are good in spite of, not because of, the Brighamite Church. So for a reminder of what kind of a monster Brigham Young truly was, go back and listen to Uncle Mark's segment last week. Or you can pull up a recent episode of a local show called Radio West with author Joanna Brooks, author of Mormonism and White Supremacy. Brigham Young was a supremely racist man before he became an unaccountable autocrat. As basically a warlord/dictator/prophet, Brigham was occasionally constrained by the ever-encroaching American government, but within his kingdom he reigned supreme, and he reigned supreme for 29 years. Vladimir Putin's only been the leader of Russia for 20, so imagine the effect of this person on this institution.
Yeah, suck it, Putin.
That's right. We're number one. For 29 years, Brigham built the Mormon Church in his image. There were no factions to speak of. There was no opposition party, no constitutional rights to assemble or petition the government. There was just Brigham Young sitting at the top of every pyramid, civil, cultural, and religious.
And marital.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and sexual.
And financial.
And financial. Imagine the political and social views of the hierarchy of the church that Brigham built. You can be pretty sure that there were no social justice warriors in that lot.
Right.
The church that Brigham built was a hard-bitten, desert-dwelling, heavily armed, white supremacist cult built on child sexual trafficking. And that's a true. So what would people look and act like in our modern day had they stayed true to the church that Brigham built? Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Cliven Bundy and the Bundy clan and their ongoing hijinks in The Ballad of Cliven Bundy.
I do love calling something that ends with bloodshed hijinks. I think that's always a...
Well, there's not for subjects for our show, the body count is surprisingly low.
It's modest.
That's true.
Yeah.
And for a Mormon story, it's quite modest.
Yeah.
Well, and for a story of like religious nut jobs clashing into federal agents, it's modest.
Look,
too.
There are several points in this story where things could have become exceptionally bloody.
Yeah, it's a testament to the patience and good judgment of the federal agents and not the Bundys. But Doug will explain.
It definitely depends on the color of the Bundy skin. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
So the title, The Ballad of Cliven Bundy, was, of course, coined by Stephen Colbert back in April of 2014 on his show, The Colbert Report, right in the middle of the first armed Bundy standoff with the federal government, but before the second armed Bundy standoff with the federal government that led directly, and perhaps inevitably, to a sovereign citizen waggling a giant dildo in a bird sanctuary. It's a journey.
Angrily.
Is there another way to waggle a dildo?
That's for patrons only.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Cliven Bundy was born in Las Vegas in 1946. For those of you who don't know, in one of life's starkest yet most pointless ironies, Las Vegas was originally settled by Mormons.
Yeah.
Bundy was born a devout Mormon to devout Mormon parents, and he was raised in the most conservative part of a conservative religion. Think of the bullseye in a dartboard, but in this case, a dartboard where every ring is white.
Yeah, think if you were born and raised in the Kaaba in the middle of Mecca. Right? That was your house that everybody walked around 7 times. Like, that's kind of where these guys are from.
So,
right?
The area of southwestern Utah and eastern Nevada that Cliven Bundy was born into is kind of a scary place. If what the Mormonism that Cliven Bundy was brought up on is akin to the Wahhabism of Mormonism, then this part of the Southwest is akin to the tribal regions of Mormonism. Mm-hmm. A quick note, I'm going to refer to BLM a lot in this segment. So just for clarity, in the context of the story, that's Bureau of Land Management and not Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Although you could replace it and it would still kind of make sense.
It would be a weird story.
Yeah.
So as we'll discuss, in the years leading up to these armed standoffs, BLM trucks were repeatedly shot at, and BLM officers took to traveling this area in groups. Wow. This is how dangerous this area was. If you've ever driven from Salt Lake City to Vegas, you've driven through this region. In fact, the tract of desert right after you leave Mesquite is the town of Bunkerville, where Cliven grew up and where much of our tale takes place. If you were a person of color or have an Obama sticker on your car, I would not recommend taking the exit to Bunkerville.
No.
Wow.
Cliven was born into cattle ranching, which is big business in the Southwest and in many cases is still a family business. So Cliven and his wife would have 14 children to help them with their business.
Did they have 14?
14 children, and as of the time of this record, they have 60 grandchildren. So
when what you're good at is herding a bunch of wild animals or a bunch of animals from place to place, you're fine with a lot of children.
Do what you know. Yep.
Corral them and rope and brand them, and you're good.
Yeah.
So as Cliven grew up, he became politically and rhetorically aligned with various armed right-wing organizations that litter the western U.S., including the Sovereign Citizen Movement, the Oath Keepers, the White Mountain Militia, the Praetorian Guard, the Posse Comitatus organization, and the Tenther Movement. There really are only a couple of things that we need to know about these various groups. They don't like the federal government. They really don't like black people, but they really do like guns. So, good people. A couple other beliefs that bear mentioning. They believe that the federal government cannot own land.
Hey, Doug, sorry. I feel like you're going to have to prove that they don't like black people.
If you're going to make me do the work, I'll get there. I'll do the work. Right? It's a stretch, okay? They don't think the federal government can own land, and they think that the highest law enforcement arm of the government is the local sheriff. So they're those kooks.
On what would they base the idea that the federal government can't own land? That's
Well, I don't actually know the answer to that because in the Constitution it says that it can.
Yeah,
But
that's what I'm saying. Like, it just seems like that they're just making that part up. That's just
And this hayseed rode around famously with a copy of the Constitution in his shirt pocket.
always poking out of his shirt pocket.
Yeah,
So,
and I do happen to have some knowledge of where the sheriff's thing comes from, Doug. If you're not going to
Sure.
talk about it, it's in the There's a line in the Magna Carta about the Magna fucking Carta, guys. Not even our founding document, right?
right.
In the Magna Carta, there is something about the authority of the sheriff, and in feudal England, I imagine the sheriff was probably the highest local law enforcement person for huge areas. So somehow they've taken that language from the Magna Carta and just hidden the Constitution under it for some, and I don't exactly know why.
yeah.
The truth
think
is
that's
that,
just-
And they don't either.
Yeah.
The truth is that, as with all religious believers and stuff, what you do is you take the documents that sound like you like them, and then you only believe the things that you want to believe about them, regardless of what the document actually says, and you pick and choose and have fun with that.
Yeah, it's like a little gumbo, a little of this, a little of that, a little Magna Carta,
Yeah.
little Old Testament stirred up with a dildo, and and the police can't pull you over.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, just being aligned with these groups is not a crime. But not paying your grazing fees for 20 years is. You see, since the early 1990s, Cliven had refused to pay for a grazing license on BLM land. Why would he pay for a license from a government he believed had no jurisdiction over him? A little side note here. The federal government has pretty much always allowed cattle ranchers to graze on public lands, but with certain caveats. Ranchers have to get a grazing license, which lasts for 10 years, and because the federal government charges much less than a private property owner would for this privilege, it's essentially a farm subsidy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's basically free.
It's almost free.
So
It's
so
actually
little.
it's beyond free because the federal government maintains the fences and the water ducts and everything that keep them from getting onto the highway.
Right.
Right.
And I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, on balance, these farmers are saving money by buying these grazing licenses. But Cliven had refused to pay his fees for so long that the sum he owed the government had topped out at $1 million by 2014.
Yeah, Doug, correct me if I'm wrong. It's like $1.35 a head.
Yeah, it's preposterously low. And so just for context about how fucking egregious this is, at the same time, the total amount of outstanding grazing fees in the entire country was $237,000.
Oh my God!
So Cliven Bundy himself owed more than 4 times what the entire rest of the country owed. And most of that 237,000 they just haven't been paid yet, right? They're not delinquent.
Right.
So Cliven Bundy is unique. Wow. And then, of course, leaving aside the fact that all this land was stolen in the first place, or that cattle ranching is terrible for the environment, one of the reasons the BLM administers this program is to prevent overgrazing and soil degradation.
Right.
A grazing herd of cattle, particularly near a water source, can wreak havoc on the land. The BLM directs ranchers where they can and cannot graze their cattle year to year to mitigate this. And then, of course, you have to add to all that in 1989, the federal government declared the desert tortoise an endangered species. And so stricter regulations were put in place. Cliven and his ilk have been serial violators of all of those regulations.
Right.
You're not going to tell me what I can graze my cattle because of some damn turtle?
Yeah.
Well, there are videos, and I will not, don't look at them, but of ranchers kicking those turtles to show them who's boss.
Oh, they're so clever. With their fun little.
I'm so fucking
animal
tired
torture.
of people's misunderstanding of how the system works.
Yeah.
It's BLM land, and for people who don't know, it's federal land that everybody owns. It's public. Everybody, every taxpayer in this country owns that land, and it is extremely common, not just for the Bundys, but for people who use that land to act like it's their fucking property.
Yep.
And that nobody else has any business having an opinion about it.
That's right.
And it's a fucking nightmare here in the West, and the Bundys are maybe not even the worst violators of it, but there you go.
Well, I think they are. They would let their herds roam free, often cutting fences and causing damage to the land and their neighbors' herds. The Bundy cattle were notorious in the area for being underfed, feral, and generally destructive. Neighbors constantly complained to the BLM, but both the neighbors and the BLM were wary of a confrontation with Cliven Bundy because of his affiliations. Yeah. Like I said, nosy BLM vehicles often returned with bullet holes.
That's so crazy.
This all came to a head in 2014 when the BLM had finally had enough and began to round up Bundy's rogue cattle to settle his debt. This led to a small scuffle on a dusty Nevada road when a couple of Bundy's elder children, Ammon and Ryan, remember those names, and several armed friends challenged the BLM agents. Ammon kicked a police dog, for which he did get tased. However, the BLM was outnumbered and outgunned, so they retreated. No arrests were made. So just contextualize that scene with what we're watching happening in our streets right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Bundy put out a call for armed militants to come to his aid, and boy, did they. Heavily armed militiamen from all over the West descended on Bunkerville, complete with high-power assault rifles, scoped sniper rifles, bulletproof vests, and all the other trinkets that small men used to compensate for that one time in the junior high school locker room when it moved. I know I don't have to prove to anybody listening that local and federal authorities act very differently depending on the color of the skin of the people they're interacting with. So just mark this as Exhibit 1,255,000,000.
Right.
But what came next would be inconceivable if the perpetrators were anything but white.
Right.
Militiamen took up sniper positions on overpasses and in the desert brush, training their crosshairs on federal agents in broad daylight on the news. Several dozen on horseback formed a line and charged the federal agents. One of their number, a former sheriff named Richard Mack, said they were, quote, strategizing to put all the women up front. If they're going to start shooting, it's going to be the women. They're going to be televised all across the world getting shot by these rogue federal officers.
Jesus
Good
Christ.
That's, but that's a perfectly, standard issue way of thinking that Mormon men about Mormon women,
Right.
rural, especially in rural contexts, right?
Yeah.
They're a prop for my usage.
Yeah. And yet, throughout this entire confrontation, that would later be dubbed the Battle of Bunkerville, no tear gas was used, no rubber bullets fired, no arrests were made. And eventually the federal government backed down. They stopped rounding up Bundy's rogue cattle. They released some, but they wanted Bundy to buy back the rest as a way of recouping something.
Right.
So with the armed standoff over, but with the federal government still having several of Bundy's cattle, the whole thing just kind of converted into a media circus. Cliven and some of his children were on all the major news networks and were nearly nightly guests on Sean Hannity's show, where he did nothing to temper their violent anti-government rhetoric, and in fact encouraged it. Things got really off the rails here for a few days. The armed militiamen, with the standoff effectively over, had nothing to do. So they started roaming the area and setting up armed checkpoints and stopping cars demanding proof of citizenship. It was really scary.
Yeah, because
On
these
public
guys,
roads.
these
On
guys
public
were
roads.
living out the fantasy that they had for years, which they had been stockpiling these weapons for no real reason. And finally, they got a chance to feel righteous about the government coming to take blah blah blah, and then nothing happened.
What are you going to do? You're going to go back to your job at Target? No.
Right? No, hell no.
All right. So no one was sure how this was going to end peaceably. It seemed like it was almost predestined to end in some kind of violence. And then footage of Cliven Bundy appeared, where he dispensed some of his nuanced positions on race. And it all pretty much went to shit. In the footage, Cliven is giving some sort of sermon next to a highway overpass. And yes, it's as sad as it sounds. In which he says the following. So, trigger warning, this is some racist shit.
Yeah.
He said, quote, I want to tell you one more thing I know about the Negro.
Oh, boy.
So, we're starting strong.
This was not 1951.
This was 2014 that he said this stuff.
Oh, my God.
And he said, when I would go through northern Las Vegas and I would see these little government houses, and in front of the government house that the door was usually open, and the older people and the kids, and there's always at least a half a dozen people sitting on the porch. They didn't have nothing to do. They didn't have nothing for their kids to do. They didn't have nothing for their young girls to do. And because they were basically on government subsidy, and so now what do? They abort their young children. They put their young men in jail because they never learned how to pick cotton.
Oh, damn.
My God.
Damn, that is some upper level racist shit.
Yeah, that's top tier right there.
From
So
a guy,
their
from a guy
options
who
are-
has been sucking on the government teat for decades.
With 14 children.
That is astoundingly powerful.
No shit. He owes the federal government $1 million, Doug?
$1 million.
And oh fuck. And
So-
I love that. I love the idea that black people have two options: sit on the porch and abort babies, or pick cotton.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
And when they're bored, abortion is a fun thing, right? We all enjoy a good
you think
abortion.
Cliven Bundy literally sees the world in black and white like a dog. Like he just does not have color vision.
So
Unbelievable.
I'm not done with the quote. There's one last little bit. He says, quote,
Oh, good.
And
Oh,
I've
good. I
often
was
want-
hoping. I was worried that
Oh,
you were
yeah.
done.
I've often wanted to know whether they were better off as slaves picking cotton, having family life, and doing things, or are they better off under government subsidy? That's enough from you, motherfucker.
Wow.
I know. This was such a racist atom bomb that even Sean Hannity had to beat a hasty retreat. And one of the only truly funny things that's come out of this whole sordid affair must have been the absolute exodus of news trucks and journalists from the Bundy compound immediately after that video landed. It went from, he was like wall-to-wall coverage to crickets.
It was like the biggest story in the country.
Yeah.
And Hannity, I think, had him on every night for at least a week, maybe more.
More than that, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the next day, it was just color bars, right? Like
Yeah.
Bundy never happened.
Yep. Stephen Colbert in his bit is so funny. He's like, because Colbert is playing a conservative character, and he's like, I wish I'd gotten it there first before Hannity and really tied Cliven Bundy around my neck like some kind of lucky seabird. So that was basically it for the 2014 standoff. No one was arrested. Bundy got most of his cattle back and continued to graze them illegally. And yes, he's still doing that to this day.
Nobody ever was arrested or held accountable in any way for that shit.
No, there were some arrests. You're not going to like the end of that part of the story either, though. Okay. They come down the road a little bit, though. For what happened in 2014, no arrests.
That's shocking.
And then the federal government was humiliatingly defeated by a bunch of heavily armed assholes.
Right.
To be a little fair, after Waco and Ruby Ridge and several other incidents that ended in fiery death, the federal government has tried to take kind of a de-escalatory approach to these kinds of group standoffs, to which I have a question and a comment. Why does this not apply to groups of black people? And you know you had to, that all you were doing was emboldening these yokels, and they were inevitably going to try again.
Right.
So, and sure enough, there was a sequel. However, in this case, the sequel was a sad and silly shadow of the original. Think Highlander 2. Most of the same characters, but way lower budget, and could have had a better setting.
Yeah.
So, a couple of Bundy's eldest sons, Ammon and Ryan, we mentioned before, decided that for their next trick, they weren't going to wait for the tyrannical government to come to them. They were going to strike at it first. And where would be the best place to strike at a runaway federal autocracy? The Federal Reserve? Perhaps the Pentagon? No, dummies. Ammon and Ryan knew exactly where the locus of power of this totalitarian regime truly is. A non-operating bird sanctuary in rural Oregon. Hey, man.
Look,
That's
nobody
that's how
said
you
they're
get 'em.
smart.
It's good to have achievable goals.
Yeah. Nobody said they're smart. They're crazy.
Nope.
They're dangerous, but they're not smart.
That is true. Before we talk about the actual bird refuge, let's talk about Ammon and Ryan. Some listeners might recognize the former's name, as it is one of the main action heroes in the Book of Mormon. And this Ammon was also a man of action, although that action mostly takes the form of curating his immaculately trimmed beard. Seriously, these guys and their facial hair. Like, for rugged mountain men, they look so recently coiffed.
Yeah.
It's a very metrosexual feel.
As for Ryan, how do I put this? He's not easy on the eyes.
No.
His face has been severely deformed by a truck accident when he was a kid, working on the family's melon farm. The story of what happened is a bit gruesome for the show, but the legend goes that Father Cliven didn't have health insurance, and Ryan basically had to walk off a broken arm, fractured skull, and severely damaged motor nerves in his face.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
good people.
they sought no medical treatment, and so now this guy goes through life with his face literally on sideways.
That's right. It's pretty gruesome. And to your point, Uncle Mark, having been raised by a deranged racist in a hyper-conservative cult in one of the most remote parts of the continent did nothing for these brothers' IQ.
No.
The reason they chose this venue to begin to topple the oligarchy was, A, it was empty and they wouldn't have to actually do anything to seize it, just drive up and walk in.
It was closed for the season, right?
It was closed for the season.
No, nobody there. Not
No
even
one
a
there.
caretaker. Yeah.
Not even a caretaker.
Yeah.
And B, because two local ranchers, Dwight and Stephen Hammond, had been convicted of starting a forest fire, and the Bundys, to the Bundys and their crew, this was going to be their cause. The Hammonds, by the way, did not ask for their help and wanted nothing to do with them the whole time.
Yeah, this was again one of those things that like kind of got started probably on some online militia forum, desperately seeking anything to get mad
Cause.
about.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, probably on 8chan or something, right?
So that didn't stop the Bundy brothers and several other armed militiamen on January 2nd, 2016, from storming the beaches of Normandy, driving up to the Malauer National Wildlife Refuge and walking inside. Paths of glory, this was not. Authorities had absolutely no interest in giving these jackasses the confrontation they so desperately wanted, so they took up positions on all the roads surrounding the refuge and stayed far enough away that the militiamen couldn't see them, leading them to believe there was no police presence, which was a huge disappointment. It wouldn't be the only one. The occupation was a fiasco front to back. The supposed reason for them being there, the Hammonds, disavowed them. The local community was embarrassed by their antics and wanted them gone, and the press coverage was less than flattering. This led to the only lasting contributions this occupation has given to our country, Tarp Man and the dildo situation.
Tarp Man is my favorite thing ever. I couldn't believe I was watching that when it was on TV.
By the way, Tarp Man and the dildo situation was the name of Uncle Mark's high school band.
Yeah, and it was a solo. It was a solo effort. Yeah.
Tarp Man was, if you haven't seen this, and it has a somewhat tragic ending, unfortunately, but there's a reporter for MSNBC doing one of his on-the-ground reports, and there's kind of just a pile of tarps behind him, and all of a sudden it kind of moves and moves again.
Yeah.
And this guy just lifts up this tarp that he's been sitting underneath. It's
Yeah,
just sitting.
he's hiding in the middle of like a parking lot, right, Doug? In a bright blue tarp. He's hiding there.
And he's got a rifle on his lap, but he's
sitting in a folding chair.
Yeah, he's sitting in a folding chair, but he's completely covered by the tarp. Like you could just walk right up to him and he would not see you coming.
Yeah. They're all geniuses, these fucking people. Every one of them.
This character was Robert Lavoy Finicum. He will come up in a few minutes, not in a good way. Soon after occupying the bird refuge, these dunderheads realized they had not brought sufficient provisions, so they sent out a call for supplies that included, among other survival staples, vanilla cream and lotion. And the people responded, mostly by sending dildos. So many dildos.
Oh, America.
This led to an absolutely painful video where one of the militants had gathered up all the dildos on a table.
And there were a lot.
There were a lot, to show how unfazed they all were by this. In the video, he holds up what must be a 2-foot dildo to complain about how immature people were being. Now, uncles, I know I've said this more than once, but there is no argument that is not significantly undercut by waggling a 2-foot dildo. Unless
Agree to disagree.
Unless the argument is, I like dildos.
Yeah, agree to disagree. Yeah.
So, incidentally, Cliven was en route to Oregon to support his idiot sons when he was arrested for the 2014 standoff.
Oh, how funny.
The police had to wait that long for him to go to an airport where they knew for once he wouldn't be armed. And they finally arrested him. So this pathetic occupation rolled into its fourth week when, desperate for some favorable coverage, all of the leaders of the movement attempted to drive to a public meeting in a nearby town. The government decided this was their time, and they stopped the vehicles. Ammon and a couple other guys surrendered peacefully, but the other truck was being driven by none other than Lavoy Finicum, who stomped on the gas and made a break for it. Several miles further down the snowy road, police had set up a roadblock. Finicum rammed his truck through the snowbank, jumped out, and immediately started yelling, "You're going to have to shoot me," over and over. When it became apparent that the police were not going to do it, he pulled out a gun, and they did. So he was the only fatality to come of all of this stupidity.
Yeah, and it seems like he was really angling for suicide by cop, right?
He was trying to get killed. He wanted to be a martyr.
He wanted to be a martyr for a cause that didn't exist.
Well, and then all of a sudden, at that moment, he realized he'd left his tarp back in the parking lot so they could see him.
Yeah.
So
He thought he was like the tarp is like blue screen color. I think he thought he was just taken out of the digital background. So.
A handful of militants kept the occupation going for a couple more weeks, but it eventually petered out. Several were arrested, and some were allowed to leave and go home because, white. Although Cliven, Ammon, and Ryan, along with about 25 other militants, were arrested and charged for crimes stemming from both the armed standoffs, in 2017, a judge threw out the entire case against the Bundys because of prosecutorial misconduct. So a really shitty way for this to end.
Yeah.
So again, to be clear, the sanitized corporate retail Mormonism most of us see during conference or when Mitt Romney speaks is miles and miles away from the frontier, violent, racist Mormonism that Brigham Young intended. But that militant strain is still around.
Oh, for sure.
Now like the Westboro Baptists, once these guys caught a taste of fame, they were hooked, and they have basically become professional protesters, showing up at courthouses and police stations or anywhere there might be a camera. And with their long hoped-for revolution still unrealized, I doubt we've seen the last of them.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's old Cliven and his crew.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, when you realize that you're unarrestable, you're going to be emboldened. Like that's going to happen.
Not only are you arrestable, but the government will back down when you brandish your firearm. So yeah.
It's that's crazy talk.
And because Utah is still a small enough place, I know someone very well who used to be very close to these people. And he's like, they're as every bit as fucking horrible as they publicly present themselves to be.
Yeah.
So there you go.
All right.
Well, so much fun. Thanks for that, Doug.
Let's leave him in the melon patch.
Bye-bye.
Let's move along.
Bye.
Uncle Dan.
Yes.
You know what country we never talk about anymore? It's just
Because we're no longer allowed to under current federal law.
that big old country on the other side of the world called Russia? You've heard of it.
I've never seen it, but you have.
I have seen
Haven't
it,
you?
and I don't know how you say "go big" or "go home" in Russian, but I think that is the Russian motto.
I think that's what Vladimir Putin means, is go.
Yeah.
So for a guy who's 5'2", it's kind of
Right.
It's an aspirational name. So, well, let's talk about Russia a little bit, shall we, fellas?
Is he really only 5'2"?
He's a very petite man, and he wears some very complicated lifts because he doesn't feel terribly secure about it. But that we can't relate to that in any way with any leaders we might know.
No.
So, the three of us guys, we've all been to cathedrals, right? And we've seen some
A few, one or two.
damned impressive structures around Europe and South America, etc. For me, I'm as much a lover of history and architecture as I am an atheist. So I feel just a little conflict strolling around these magnificent monuments to bad ideas and ginormous expenditures of wealth and manpower in societies that might have done much better to expend those resources elsewhere.
Right.
Massive church buildings stuffed with gold and silver bought with the blood and enslavement of tens of millions of indigenous Americans and Africans. But despite some unfortunate HR and labor issues back in the day, they're pretty fucking impressive. And
They're amazing.
that is the point, after all, is it not?
Yeah.
Well, guys, massive-ass cathedrals are not just the residue of the medieval yesteryear. There is a brand new one that rivals some of the greats in some ways. And no, I don't mean Mormonism's brand new, totally vacant temple in Rome. No, our friend, and actual president, Vladimir Putin, has himself a shiny new trinket, and that is the just consecrated and fucking impressive Main Cathedral of the Russian Armed Forces, with the modest subtitle, I know, big red flags everywhere and not just
Right.
communist ones, with the modest subtitle of the Cathedral of the Resurrection of Jesus Christ. And while this may sound like a New York Times architectural review, it's only partly that. I can't speak for all atheists, but one of the things that keeps a lot of us up at night, myself included, is the corrosive and toxic effect religion has on civic government and public institutions, and how church-state collusion is inevitably dangerous to human rights, minority populations, education, democracy, and an informed populace.
I don't know where you're getting that.
Keen listeners,
I don't know where you're getting that from.
I'm going way, way out on thin ice with this one. So,
Yeah.
keen listeners may recognize all those things I just named as things Vladimir Putin very much despises. So let's explore how this military cathedral is a disturbing development in the degradation of what little remains of any of those liberalities in modern Russia. It's important to keep in mind that there is a long tradition of the Russian Orthodox Church building religious monuments to military victories, as they did commemorating the victories over the Mongols in the 14th century, the Swedes in the 18th century, and, of course, the little-known Napoleon in the 19th century. So,
do you really have to build a monument to defeating Swedes? That just feels...
They were more
like
of a threat than
victory.
I would have thought when I read about it. They've had a change of heart since then. So,
bye, Swedish listeners. It was fun.
Bye.
To start, let's just talk about this fucking building. It is, as I mentioned before, impressive. It's an intriguing combination of classic Russian imperial ecclesiastical architecture and the size fucking matters maximalist modernism of the post-Soviet oligarchy. It is, I think, the tallest church in the Orthodox world at 95 meters, which is almost 30 stories tall.
Wow. Holy shit.
It sits on a massive piece of land that is adjacent to a humongous theme park dedicated to Soviet Russian military, to the Soviet Russian and military might, just a short drive outside of Moscow.
It's weird. It's like Anaheim, where there's two theme parks really close to each other.
This one you can get baptized at.
Yeah.
The huge exterior is...
The log flume ride is really interesting. They just baptize you all.
They could do that too. The huge exterior is a deep red brick. More about those bricks in just a tick. And the inside is a really amazing multi-tone army green vibe, but overflowing with gold ornament, massive stained glass ceilings, and huge, incredible mosaics, which are just a little bit problematic. And more on those in just a tick as well. But perhaps most mind-blowing of all, it was built in just under 600 days.
Wow.
Wow.
From breaking ground to consecration.
And you sent us that video of it, and I would have thought it took 20 years to build.
It's huge and extremely elaborate, and it's fucking impressive in a lot of different ways.
It's a testament to what can be accomplished if you don't care about the humans building it.
Exactly, or where the money comes from, and we'll talk about that.
Right.
Isn't that a truism of basically everything built before 1972?
Yeah,
and probably after.
Quite a bit after. So the cathedral was the idea of the current Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. That should also be a red flag. Probably with a nudge from Putin, who demanded that every square meter of the building be dripping with meaning and symbolism. And so it is. The towers that hold hold up the golden onion domes are 19.45 meters wide, commemorating the year the Second World War ended, or as the Russians call it, the Great Patriotic War. The height of the belfry is 75 meters, commemorating 75 years since the end of the war. The cathedral was originally meant to be consecrated on May 9th, the day Germany surrendered to the Soviets, but COVID-19 delayed it until this week. And at the height of its lowest dome is 14.18 meters, commemorating the number of days the USSR fought Nazi Germany, 1,480 days.
Wow.
Huh.
So, despite being an ethical nightmare, this cathedral is baller. It looks like the Iraqian temple where Paul Atreides is going to kill Feyd-Rautha in the new Dune movie. This place is so fucking metal. The huge two-tiered front staircase is made out of, and this is true, melted down captured Nazi guns. It's amazing. The four chapels within it are dedicated to the Orthodox patron saints of the four branches of the Russian military. You guys know who these are, of course. Starting with Barbara the Great Martyr, patroness of the strategic missile forces. That's right. Essentially patron saint of nuclear war. Holy Apostle Andrew
They call her Boom Boom Barb.
Barbara Boom Boom. The Holy Apostle Andrew the First Called, patron saint of the Navy. And naturally, Saint Alexander Nevsky, patron saint of the ground forces. I'll include a video of it in the show notes. Watch it with the sound up. The remixed Russian men's choir trip hop thing seriously adds to the vibe.
Yeah, it's at that really brooding, weird.
Yeah,
It's great. It's very fitting music.
it's perfect for it. So now I hear you saying, Uncle Mark, well, the name of this Russian Orthodox militarist monstrosity is the Main Cathedral of the Russian Armed Forces. Its subheading is Cathedral of the Resurrection of Christ. You know, the character in season 2 of the Bible who is the Prince of Peace, the penniless healer who healed the sick and preached love and turning the other cheek. No? To which I say, why don't you shut the fuck up about all that hippie bullshit before you fall out a window or touch a radioactive doorknob like everyone else who ever gets crosswise of Vladimir Putin?
Right.
The Jesus of this here cathedral rode a tank, held a general's rank when the blitzkrieg raged and the bodies stank. It is maybe not possible to overstate the significance of the Second World War, or, as I said, the Russians call it the Great Patriotic War, to the Russian character and culture. For modern Russians, it's the defining struggle of Russian history, more so than the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, or even the triumphant 2008 Eurovision victory of Russian pop singer Dima Bilan with his emotional ballad Believe.
Which is shocking because that was glorious.
I'm going to include the video of that as well in the show notes. I promise you it must be seen to be believed. Swear to me you'll watch it all the way to the end, and if you don't get a time-traveling cocaine contact high, I will give you your money back.
Listen, I watched this video. Uncle Mark sent it to us to prepare for the show today, and I want to live a life where I end up in a white tailored suit with no shoes, kneeling on a stage, playing the violin. I want to be that guy. There was a part of that
with
video
a madly
that was,
coked up figure skater just spinning around you at impossible RPMs.
Did you notice something about that though? There was the violinist, the singer, and the figure skater, and they were all on a little rink of ice that was about 8 feet wide,
Tiny.
Okay,
I don't even think it was ice. I think it was some substance,
Synthetic thing. Yeah, there's like a synthetic ice.
whatever it was. Yeah. There was one dude on that little pedestal skating on razor blades, literally,
around a
and
barefoot
another dude
man.
on that pedestal was barefoot.
I know.
Yeah.
I was so cringing. I'm like, he's gonna lose a fucking toe.
Yeah,
He's gonna lose a toe.
You knew something else about that
Russia.
figure skater, Doug.
Yeah, that figure skater was one of the Russian figure skaters that was involved in the 2002 Olympic judge purchasing scandal that happened right here in good old Salt Lake City.
Yeah, he was like a national hero. That guy.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to World War II. But for real, Joseph Stalin's Russia did eventually defeat Hitler's Germany after first stupidly believing that Hitler would honor their non-aggression pact. Spoiler, he did not. He was kind of a stinker that way. Then throwing a generation of Russian humanity into an existential conflict with the far more developed and technically advanced Germany. While Nazi Germany lost a staggering 5.3 million troops on multiple fronts, Stalin's USSR, at least according to the Russian Defense Ministry and this cathedral's designers, lost 33 million Russian soldiers on the single front with Germany.
Holy shit.
Yeah, FYI, that number is higher than most estimates, and it also does not obviously include civilians, which was probably an equivalent number, by the way. But if true, that means there was a more than 6-to-1 loss rate against Germany. Obviously, these were not evenly matched adversaries. While Germany had highly developed industries and the most advanced military technology in the world, Russia had an ocean of land, horrendous winters, and an almost inexhaustible reservoir of poor peasants to throw into the breach, along with a leader that might have been even more malevolent towards his own people than Hitler was.
Right.
Long story short, they fucking won. And on May 2nd, 1945, Soviet troops raised the red hammer and sickle standard over the ruins of Berlin. So let's cut our Russian comrades some slack for wanting to commemorate their unlikely triumph over the Nazi war machine. Despite Stalin's arguably equivalent misanthropy, Russia used what Russia had available to defeat the world's greatest superpower at the time. So they deserve a couple victory laps.
Point of order. The U.S. obviously defeated Hitler. Everybody knows that. Ask Quentin Tarantino. Read a book. I mean, watch a movie.
Read a movie. But commemoration of a massive sacrifice and victory and the further degradation of civil society and freedom should not be the same thing. If this were simply the Russian Orthodox Church undertaking this massive effort, it would be one thing, but it's not that. Remember that it was essentially commissioned by the Defense Ministry and built on its land in a giant militaristic theme park.
Right.
So the cathedral project was supposed to be built solely from private donations, but the directors have worked to keep the financing and budget super secret. And because nothing in modern Russia is really what it appears to be, firstly, they claimed the entire project, and you guys have seen this video, only cost $87 million US.
That's impossible.
If it's 4 times that, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
It's a colossal undertaking, covered in fucking gold, built at a breakneck pace. Like, that would normally be a 5-6 year project.
Yeah.
Yeah. That amount of money wouldn't cover the ceilings of that place.
No, it wouldn't cover the mosaics. So investigative reporting also turned up evidence that the Kremlin has contributed at least half the money, meaning this war church has sucked up secretive, unknown millions in taxpayer funds. There's also a lot of controversy about how the actual donations were acquired. As it's really a military project, the top brass see it as a huge prestige project for them, and they've personally dumped in huge sums as officers and generals. And according to the same investigative reports, they've also pressured lower officers to cough up huge sums, who in turn coerce lower-ranking cadets and grunts to contribute their meager incomes, leaving them almost penniless.
Jesus Christ.
But if they refuse, they don't get paid at all, since salary in the Russian military is apparently solely based on assessment of individual conduct. Wow. So, super corrupt, right? And remember, not everyone in the Russian military is an Orthodox Christian. There are plenty of Muslims, Christians of other stripes, and non-believers being forced to pay for this thing in a country that, at least on paper, does not have an official religion yet.
Right.
So let's get back.
There's literally, the Russian government and the Russian Orthodox Church are so hand-in-hand, lockstep, like besties.
Yeah, and Putin
it's a ridiculous notion.
Like we talked about the 20th century dictators earlier in the show. You can get rid of a church, or you can just see it as a useful system for controlling people. And I think that's exactly what Putin's done, right? So anyway, the big oligarchs have kicked in money, and those red bricks I mentioned earlier, they were donated by Kalashnikov, the makers of the most prolific weapon of war ever produced, the AK-47 and its variants, a weapon so effective and so fucking cheap, it's the gun of choice of the poorest of insurgencies and revolutionaries, and yes, terrorists everywhere. There are, at the moment, probably 100 million in circulation in the world. That Kalashnikov.
It's also one of the most popular guns in our homegrown terrorists. It
definitely is. So
the right wing of this country is a fan.
So it was that Kalashnikov that donated the lovely red bricks for the Cathedral of the Resurrection of Christ. That's the most Russian thing you will probably hear today.
Yeah.
So the murals. Now, when you watch the video, you will see some of these exquisite mosaic murals. Fucking beautiful. But photographs leaked a while back of some, controversial images on them. One of them being the face of the denounced genocidal psychopath Joseph Stalin. In the mural, his face is on a banner carried by soldiers celebrating the end of World War II. So his direct body is, his actual image is arguably not in it. So the directors of the project explained him away as part of the actual history of the war, and he's hard to separate from it, obviously, so okay, sure. But then there was a panel showing the current and likely forever president, Vladimir Putin, and his living defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, and the current head of the secret police, and even Russia's current puppet in Crimea. More on that in a second.
Wow.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay, that's weird, but it's not unusual for leaders of post-Soviet kleptocracies to build monuments to themselves. See Turkmenistan and Turkmenbakhshi for one classic example.
Right.
But even long-suffering Russians found the mural in just too much bad taste, and the press was really bad. And reportedly, at the direction of Putin himself, the mural was removed. His spokesman said, when he was told about this, Putin smiled and said, someday our thankful descendants will appreciate our merits, but it is too early to do so now. Spooky.
Did he say that while looking out over, his kingdom with a glass of brandy?
I feel like he barbecue.
Yeah. I feel like he was somehow communicating telepathically directly to his descendants.
Yeah. So anyway,
of me.
there is yet another mural with a group of modern people standing around a banner that says, "Crimea is ours." If you recall, the 2014 unofficial wink annexation of Crimea from the Ukraine was supposedly the work of local pro-Kremlin irregular forces, but were widely known to be Russian troops without insignia that were dubbed the Little Green Men. They are the modern people standing around that banner. So Russia, already a very bad actor on the international stage, became something more of a pariah state after the Crimean invasion, getting heavily sanctioned, kicked out of the G7, et cetera, et cetera. But here they are, admitting to The Hague, essentially, in the form of a mosaic mural, yeah, it was us, fuck you. But with all the World War II, Stalin, the ancient iconography, and the failed, for now, attempt to get Putin and his goons rendered as heroic, holy icons, the really troubling thing is that the Putinistas are trying to rewrite or re-edit Russian civilization as a mythic, Christo-fascist warrior cult with a direct line from Jesus through Peter the Great, through Stalin, and ultimately to Putin, to fuse church and state at the worst possible point, a nuclear-armed military and an anti-democratic, despotic, failed petrostate. And this church is brick and mortar evidence of the nightmarish road that seems, unfortunately, likely to lie ahead for our Russian friends. Now, if you don't believe me, let me quote the words of the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, at the consecration ceremony. With this harmony between the might of the armed forces and the spiritual might of the church, of the spiritual and the material, of church and state, let the path of our people go into the future in peace and prosperity. And of this path, God willing, let there be new victories, new achievements, and no defeats. So
here's the thing: you can't go into peace and have victories.
Yeah,
that's a bit of a contradiction.
Yeah, maybe it works in Russian. Probably does. So a holy army can in turn only make holy war, the cause of which would automatically have to be just. So how could it not be? So anyway, that's the story of the insane nuclear knackle in Russia, guys.
Well, I'm fascinated by the fact that that Vladimir Putin was moved by public opinion.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like, it must have been so. I don't know. That seems crazy to me. He's such an oligarch.
This is a really big move, I think, and he's smart enough that I think he knows it needs to be handled carefully.
Right.
They're just kind of recreating Russia as an entirely new being, like a phoenix. Yeah. And so, just to finish, like so many things Russian, and I say this as a person who's been there, it's kind of amazing and kind of frightening at the same time.
Yeah.
And if I go back, and I'd love to go back, I am for sure going to this place and walk.
Is it open to the public?
Yeah. It's part of this park. You can totally go. And it's also got this amazing museum complex attached to it where there's these super interactive exhibits, and it's big, of different battles and stuff. So it's very much a public place. So anyway, that's
really
it.
Cool.
And by the way,
touchscreen displays where you can blow up different countries and see what happens.
Totally. You can annex all kinds of peninsulas.
Right.
And by the way, when I was looking at a list of Russian leaders through history, this is the fun shit you learn doing this stuff. Yeah. Peter the Great and Ivan the Terrible sound like major dudes. But why do we never hear of Vasily the Dark or Vasily the Squint or false Dmitri the First? Where's their war cathedral? I also learned of the bald Harry ironic joke in Russian politics. It's a real thing. And it's really funny. Since Tsar Nicholas I, all the way through Vladimir Putin, Russian leaders have alternated between bald and hairy. Hairy guy replaces bald guy replaces hairy guy. There's a whole chart. It's silly, but Russians have to dig pretty deep for comedy, I think.
Oh my God! Yeah. Well, there you go.
Well, the more you know.
What did Russians? Vladimir Putin's been president of that country for 20 years, and is clearly doing very bad things. But at least they get a cathedral out of it. He's ruining our country, and what do we fucking get?
Yeah, he's been president. He has been in charge since 1999.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yikes.
And he's trying to get the Duma to rewrite the Constitution so he can be president for the rest of his life. So
they haven't already done that? I mean, how? Yeah.
In all but typed words. So look out for that.
Fun.
Well, that's comforting.
There you go. War Church.
Yay.
What
War
can go
Church.
Moving on.
Moving on. Gentlemen,
Hello.
Heidi-ho.
once again, more people have signed up to be patrons of our art.
What's wrong with these people?
For the longest time, all the good art was patronized, but had one major patron, and that was the church.
That's right.
And so it all ended up being about ding-dongs, chopping their own heads off and carrying them around or whatever.
Pretty churchy,
So,
yeah.
It's good that we are in an era now when non-church support can still create good things. So we have some folks to thank who have gone to the How to Heretic website and clicked on the support thing, and that's taken them to the Patreon, and then you choose how much you want to give per episode, and your level of support is your business.
That's right.
But here are the people that we need to thank. First, thank you to the Turnip of Terror, Lord Elpis. Thanks to Brian, Jane Bell, and I think it's my turn to give a saint. This saint goes to Chris. And Chris, your saint is Saint Glenn of Curitiba. And Glenn is the patron saint of very, very aggressive fish and of black beans and sausage and of copious and unnecessary plastic surgery.
Oh,
Wow.
great. Now, a quick question, just for clarity: are these fish that are by nature aggressive, or are these fish that are driven by circumstances to become aggressive?
It's, you know what? I think it applies to both.
Holy shit! Well, that's
I
a
know.
premium saint.
Yeah. You get all the good stuff when you when you patronize the How to Heretic.
That's a lot of saint.
It's all upside, baby.
Yeah.
If you can't afford to be our patron, that's fine. But hey, why not tell a friend about our show? Why not give us 5 stars on the old iTunes or wherever you find us?
Yeah, Stitcher. Can you give 5 stars on Spotify? I don't know.
Yeah,
iTunes.
Would it hurt you? Would it
hurt you?
Would it be so hard?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do that, and we will look for those stars to illuminate our night sky and bring us closer together on this beautiful flat Earth. So with that, why don't we do more show?
Ha ha.
Let's do it.
Uncle Doug.
Ho!
I don't know where you fall along the taste spectrum of the Mars confectionery company.
I have a lot of thoughts about that.
Yeah, I know we've talked about this this is probably what we talk about the most. And we should do a podcast just about your mounds, your almond joy.
Yeah, and I don't want you guys to snicker, but my opinion's worth $100,000.
Right.
Boom.
Wow.
Boom.
Doug was on deck with that.
That was
Dan,
that was improvised humor right there, ladies and
Score.
gentlemen.
Yeah, very Mormon humor. And I think jokes about confections are our wheelhouse. So what's your opinion, Dan? What's your favorite of the candy bars?
I love a lot of them. I think what you're leading me to is the youngest of the candy confections.
Yes,
the baby.
The Christ child of the candy confections.
The baby, if you will.
Yes.
One baby Ruth.
Yes.
Which
who,
I don't
who
know
looks
if
like
you
an
guys...
old alcoholic baseball player. It never made sense to me, but
yeah, I mean, what we're talking about here is the namesake of said confection.
Yes.
The Book of Ruth.
Yeah, was named after
now,
the candy bar, obviously.
Yes, exactly. Now I'm gonna, but before we get to that, I'm just gonna say, I am sorry. I know, guys, that we were all very disappointed last month when we realized that yet again we had let the Jewish holiday of Shavuot pass us by unobserved.
Oh, my
Damn
God.
it.
How did we let that happen?
Damn you, Siri! Why didn't you remind me? Anyway, as you know, Shavuot is the day that Jews celebrate when, on Mount Sinai, God gave the Torah to Moses and the Jews. I know, you thought Moses received the 10 Commandments when he went up the mountain. Wrong. He apparently received the Torah, too. What a shock it must have been for them to be given a scroll in which was written the very story that they were in the middle of being in, and a bunch of stuff that was going to happen in their future. After all, Moses went up to Sinai in Exodus, so there were still 3 more books in the Torah that came after that. Trippy, man.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's where the term scroll ahead came from.
Boom! Nailed it! You are on a roll, man. You're on fire.
Doug. What's your
Anyway.
secret? Is it the ginkgo biloba?
It's manna.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, Shavuot is a very strange lesser holiday where people celebrate in several ways. They go to synagogue to pray. They stay up late talking about the importance of the Torah. They eat a meal heavy in dairy. You can insert your own Jewish digestion joke here. But one of the biggest traditions of Shavuot is the reading of the biblical book of Ruth.
Oh.
Now, along with Esther, Ruth is one of 2 books in the Bible named after a woman. Actually, that may not be true. For all I know, Zephaniah or Haggai might be women. I have no idea on that one.
Nobody does.
No way to tell, really.
Nobody does.
So, one thing's for sure, though. Because these books are about women, they are uncharacteristically and very mercifully short for biblical books.
That's Uncle Doug's number 1 rule of the Bible.
Boom, baby. You got to go for the lady books. Ruth is only 4 chapters long, so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Now, you should know, I didn't choose the story of Ruth because it was a particularly interesting story or even crazy in some way. I literally just got curious what a book in the Bible that focuses on a woman might be like. So it's about
you know why I thought you chose it?
Why?
A candy bar aside, which I know is a big issue for you, that is the Mormon temple name given to your betrothed wife.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is true. And now I can come to her and tell her I understand her namesake. And soon you guys will be able to do that too.
And you can call her through the veil.
We'll all be able to call her forth in the final days. So I don't know whose wife she'll be in the end. I guess whoever says it first.
Doug and I can just prank call her through the veil.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Doug, you're actually the only one with the holy Melchizedek priesthood, so maybe you'll have to do it. It's on you, buddy.
I gave that up about 7 years ago.
You get a free Andrea out of it if you do it. So.
Free Ruth.
So, enjoy it. I don't know. Give it a shot.
Enjoy your
anyway. So here's the gist of the story. The town of Bethlehem was having a famine. Which seems careless of them. Yeah. Anyway, a Hebrew man who lived there decided to take his wife and 2 sons and go to a place that, had food. Now, this guy dies immediately in this story, but he was a man, so unsurprisingly, even for a story about a woman, he has a name, which is Elimelech. What is surprising is that his wife also is named, and she is called Naomi. Anyway, Elimelech takes the family to the land of the Moabites, who aren't Hebrews, so we know they're likely bad people. Actually, fun fact, the Moabites are the descendants of Moab, who was the product of that time when Lot's daughters got themselves pregnant by getting their dad drunk and raping him.
That's right.
Everybody remember that?
Yep, that was Moab.
Yep. So apparently he did pretty well for himself because now he has a whole kingdom of people named after him. So Elimelech and Naomi make the grueling 30-ish mile trek to settle there in Moab. Apparently that's far enough away that there wasn't any more famine there. I don't know. 30 miles? That's enough, I guess. Anyway, before you know it, Elimelech dies, so Naomi and the boys are on their own. But never fear, because the boys find themselves some cute local girls and get married. Oi, these progressive Jews and their interfaith marriages.
Good for them.
Right? So those girls were Ruth and Orpah, who
Yes.
we learned from Uncle Doug is who Oprah Winfrey was named after,
That's true.
which is a true.
Yeah, that's true.
They all lived their happy little lives in Moab for 10 years. And then, well, apparently the Elimelech genes were not particularly hardy because both of the boys die too.
Oh, damn.
No word on how this happened, but we now have 3 widows trying to figure out what to do with themselves. Naomi has heard that they canceled the famine back in Judah, so she decides she's going to go back to her people. Both Orpah and Ruth decide to go with her, but she tells them not to come, saying that they should stay and find themselves new husbands there in Moab, which seems a little callous considering she seems to be the only family they have left, but whatever, they'll all get along, I guess. They cry together, and then the girls say, "No, we still want to come and live with you. We'll come." But Naomi again says, "No, I'm old. I can't provide you with any more husbands. And we're super poor now. And I never liked you anyway. You go back now. You hear? You go back." Orpah she apparently could take a hint and was like, "Fuck this bitch," and she heads back. But Ruth is not as good at taking a hint, and she is determined to stay with Naomi, no matter how hard she tries to get rid of her. She says the famous line, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." Now, that is the moment that the Jews celebrate, Ruth's big conversion to Judaism. But I gotta say, there is not much hay made about it in that book. That line is really the only word on the matter. And in the context of this story, Ruth's religious conversion couldn't seem less important. I've known lots of people who converted to religions to feel accepted by the people that they love and admire. The idea that this is some amazing change of heart where suddenly Jewishness is a big deal to Ruth is really not borne out in the book, but whatever. Anyway, they head back to Bethlehem. Boom, moving on to chapter 2. Now, we have 2 unmarried women, very impoverished, trying to make their way in Bethlehem. The famine may be over, but that doesn't mean that these 2 have enough to eat. So Ruth decides to do a thing that apparently poor people did. It was barley harvest time, so Ruth went into the fields after the harvesters had been through and collected any stalks of grain that they might have missed. Now, the owner of this field, Boaz, saw her gleaning and was impressed with her diligence. Yeah, that's it. Her diligence is what he was interested in.
Sweet diligence, huh?
Yeah, she's got a nice set of diligence, if you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, my God, you're punctual.
Anyway, he asks one of the harvesters who she is, and, that's not exactly true. He asks the more pertinent biblical question, who does she belong to? Because women are not people, they are possessions. They told Boaz that she was the Moabite who came back with Naomi. Now, this didn't seem to faze him. He went to her and told her that she could totally glean in his field after the harvest, if you know what I mean. Wink, wink. Anyway, you go ahead and get what grain you can. I've told my men not to rape you or whatever, so you should be okay. Also, you can have water from my workers' pitchers, and I'm super generous. So, did you know I'm rich too? You could probably have a huge crush on me if you wanted to. Anyway, Ruth was like, "Why are you being nice to me? I'm just a piece of shit Moabite who isn't even as high on the social ladder as your servants." But it turns out that Boaz was related to Elimelech, Naomi's husband, and he had heard that Ruth had been kind to Naomi, which he thought was nice. At mealtime, Boaz called Ruth over to him and gave her bread dipped in vinegar, which I take to be a good thing. And then he gave her...
a little balsamic is nice.
Yeah, sure. And then he gave her a big shit ton of roasted grain, which, well, I guess that's also apparently nice. It was more than she could eat, so she kept the leftovers. She pocketed the leftovers. And then when she got up to go out to the fields, he told his men, to leave a bunch of grain behind as they harvested, so that she would get more. He was a real romantic, this guy. Then Ruth went home to Naomi and gave her the leftover roasted grain, sweet, and all the barley that she'd been able to gather, which was actually kind of a lot. And that's how they lived while the harvest was happening. Chapter 3. One day, Naomi said to Ruth, "Girl, we got to get you a husband stat. You're not getting any younger, and this whole leftover grain gig won't last forever. So what do you think about this Boaz guy?" Now, Ruth was cool with Boaz, so Naomi came up with a plan. They knew Boaz would be winnowing that night. That's a grain harvest thing.
Sure.
So Naomi, the one rabbit hole that I really went down, other than the Jewish holiday rabbit hole, was the grain harvesting rabbit hole. But I decided to spare you all the details. Anyway, they knew that Boaz would be winnowing, so Naomi told Ruth to put on her prettiest, whatever the fuck they wore back then. I want to say burlap sack. But
Yeah.
for the sake of the story, we'll just say her best clothes.
Put on your best rag and tie it up with your best rope fragment.
Yeah, exactly. She also told her to wash and put on perfume. So this shit was getting serious.
That's good advice.
Yes, it is. She said to go down to the threshing floor, again a grain thing, but don't let him know that you are there. Hide behind the grain, I guess. I'm picturing her in a ghillie suit covered in barley stalks like a military sniper.
Yeah.
Anyway, Ruth was supposed to watch Boaz. She would wait until he had eaten and tossed back a few drinks, and then note where he went to sleep. Then she would sneak over to him. I think you know where I'm going with this.
Keep going, Jesus Christ.
You know what? Fuck it. I'll just quote the damn Bible to you and let you guys figure it out. Quote, now this is Naomi talking to Ruth. Quote, "When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." To which Ruth replies, "I will do whatever you say." Now, I submit to you that anyone reading this honestly, that is to say, anyone who doesn't have a desperate need to bend and twist everything in the Bible to be pure and wholesome, it is crystal clear what is going on here.
Yeah.
Right.
You have a young woman getting all gussied up and going to an older rich man to convince him to marry her using the only tools she has available. It's a tale as old as time.
Well,
so
is this the only biblical story I'm aware of where some sort of consent was established?
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's progressive right there.
Yeah.
Ruth does this, and when Boaz wakes up in the middle of the night, he finds a sweet young thing lying next to him. "Who are you?" he says. "I'm Ruth," she says. "Spread your garment over me because you're the big important man of the family." Now, yes, in a metaphorical sense, she is asking him to cover her, to bring her under his protection. But also, she is very literally telling him to let her into his clothing. It really doesn't get any less ambiguous than that.
I'm afraid I don't see where you can't. This isn't sexy time. I'm sorry.
100%. And to be sure that we get what's happening, here's Boaz's response. Quote, "The Lord bless you, daughter. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor." What kindness? Uncovering his feet as he slept? Asking for a corner of his garment? No. The only way that response makes any sense is if she did some kindnesses for him. Well, after that, he gushes about her for a while and then tells her to sleep next to him until morning. Oh, but she'd better scurry off before sunrise because we wouldn't want anybody talking.
Yeah, that's classic. That's a classic move, too.
Exactly. The rest of the book is a bunch of legalese about how how another guy was actually a closer relative to Naomi than Boaz, so he had the first right of refusal on Ruth, who apparently came as a package deal with Naomi's husband's inheritance, because women, after all, are property. Fortunately, though, the other relative wanted the land but was less enthusiastic about Ruth, so he took off his sandal and gave it to Boaz, which I guess is the weird-ass equivalent to shaking hands, and the deal was done. Boaz married Ruth, and they all lived happily ever after. So the book ends with this little tidbit. Boaz and Ruth gave birth to Obed, who then fathered Jesse, who then sired David.
Oh, boy, that is a long walk for that payoff, isn't it?
It sure as hell is. Quick recap of the story. The heroine of the book of Ruth, quote, first marries a guy who dies, follows her mother-in-law back to her home, switches religions, sleeps with a rich old guy to get him to marry her, and eventually becomes the great-grandma of somebody famous. The end.
Wow, what a necessary story.
Yeah. It's funny because as I was researching this thing, a lot of Jewish rabbis have expounded on this story quite a lot, and apparently, in the Talmud, there's a lot of like other stories, a lot of other like legends surrounding this story, and one of them is that Orpah, the Moabite woman who went back to Moab, somehow had sex with hundreds of soldiers. And all at the same time. Whoa. And that was how she gave birth to Goliath.
Oh my God.
So she, who is the sister-in-law of the great-grandmother of David, was the mother of the giant Goliath that David fought. I'm not sure how that works out.
And that doesn't that also mean that David and Goliath were like cousins?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that would be an interesting twist to the story.
So there's a little family issue going. See, we didn't know that. We just thought it was war, but it's clearly some cousin rivalry.
Yeah.
And
so there you go.
Speaking, Dan, really quickly to your when we were talking about women's names in the Bible, I just kind of looked it up, and I'll read really quickly for if you don't mind what I found here.
I like it.
Professor Carla Bombach says one study produced a total of 3,000 to 3,100 names, 2,900 of which are men, with 170 of the total being women in the Bible. However, the possibility of duplication produced the recalculation of a total of 1,700 distinct personal names in the Bible, with 137 of them being women. And yet another study of the Hebrew Bible only, there were a total of 1,426 names, with 1,315 belonging to men and 111 to women. 70% of the named and unnamed women in the Bible come from the Hebrew Bible. Despite the disparities, 70%, so that means there's hardly any in the New Testament. Despite the disparities among these different calculations, it remains true that women or women's names represent 5.5 and 8% of the total names in the Bible. A study of women whose spoken words are recorded found 93, of which 49 women were named. So... good job, Bible.
Well done.
Keep it up, Bible.
Yeah. You're doing great.
It's no wonder that we all call it the good book.
Yeah. Just because it's true, is it necessary? I don't know. All right, Ruth.
Yeah, let's close the book on that. There's not much use in that.
Bye.
Bye. Moving on. Well, friends, that is it for this week's show.
Hey, we'd love to hear from you. If you did something from one of these stories, please send us an email at howtoheretic.com.
Or if you got your head run over by the Bundy's melon truck as well, you can leave us a voicemail about it at 903-88-HOW-TO, which is 903-884-6986. I'm also on Twitter at HowToHeretic.
And a mighty thanks to our honorable and wonderful patrons.
And thank you to our ballistic missile saint, Cody Layton, for editing the show.
And thanks to all of you, friends, for tuning in.
Bye-bye, friends.
Ta-ta.